Welcome, everyone. So, as a proper introduction, so Gigi is the co-founder of Batelle. Am I pronouncing that correctly,
Oh,
Gigi?
yeah, correct.
Perfect. It's a really cool, cute French name. I'd
Did
love
you
to
know
hear
it was
about.
literally, it's literally a cool, cute French name with no meaning. It was we chose it because it was a cool, cute French name with some
Ah,
so it has no meaning beyond it just sounded
fantastic. So this
yeah.
is just like the Haagen-Dazs story.
Oh, I didn't know the Haagen-Dazs story, but
All right,
very
anyone in the chat, we want to keep the interactivity going with the guests. So anyone in the chat, type in if you know the Haagen-Dazs story before I share. All right, I'm going to do the rest of your intro while people have got some time to type in the chat if you know what the Haagen-Dazs story is. Oh, wait, someone else has just messaged. No, but I love the ice cream. All right, well, I'll reveal at the end of the intro unless anyone else pops it in the chat before me. All right. So Gigi is the co-founder of Batelle, the cute French-sounding name that means nothing other than her fantastic business, which is a venture-backed company at the forefront of healthcare, education, consumer services, and of course, generative AI. We wouldn't be here in 2024 interviewing a tech entrepreneur unless AGI entered the conversation. Batelle has transformed childhood outcomes by pioneering new ways to modify parent behavior, starting with sleep solutions. I love all things to do with sleep. I mentioned earlier, I've got a crazy sleep disorder, so this definitely speaks to my heart. With a rich background as former chief of staff at the Reserve, an investment bank and strategic investor for deep tech companies, Gigi possesses deep knowledge in operations, growth, fundraising, taking products from concept to market, and intermittent fasting from the sounds of things. All right. So, for anyone who isn't already familiar, please tell us what Batelle is, first of
yeah.
all.
So the value prop, I'll start with the value prop because it makes it the most clear. It's we help people get their children to sleep within 2 weeks and go to bed in go to bed in 5 minutes and sleep through the night within 2 weeks. We started off having that as a money back guarantee. So we went in very sort of top of the market price point. It was $1,500 originally, and I'll talk through the sort of evolution of Battelle and the different sort of oh, sorry, my screen's just changed. There we go. Perfect. I'll talk through the evolution of it. But basically what we do is we understand people's sleep issues, children's sleep issues, pediatric sleep issues, and then provide super personalized guidance on how to solve them. So I think one of the sort of insights that we had initially was there was this, healthcare is broken, education is sort of lagging. And one of the ways to have the highest point of leverage was to move super upstream. And so when we were looking at what the problem was, sleep really became this kind of point of high leverage and a high pain point for parents. And
Yeah.
one of the things we realized was that no one had actually looked at sleep, and the data in the sleep space, the pediatric sleep space, was super thin. And so the first thing we had to do was figure out how to actually solve the problem. So we've sent cameras, literally like ring cameras, to over 5,000 families, put them in people's homes, and then we had a team of 24/7 sleep experts who observed moment by moment exactly how parent and child interacted. And what that allowed us to do was to really understand which interventions worked for which family, for what reason. And sort of what that's been enabled us to do is provide super personalized interventions based, it's sort of like an outcomes based coaching model that started off very human heavy and a lot of human in the loop, and now we've got sort of one product version that is totally no human in the loop, and one still partially human in the loop. But basically, regardless of what the issues are a parent comes in with, we are able to sort of understand what the child's issues are and how to solve them, and then actually help them solve them through coaching.
So is this, in layman's terms, what this actually is? Is this an app that's connected to a camera, or what is
Yeah,
this
good
exactly?
question. So it's evolved so much. It is an app. So the interface is an app. It's always been chat first, but it's an app that you get a highly personalized program. So you come in, let's say there are thousands of different variables or permutations, not thousands of variables, thousands of permutations from the variables that you get in. So for example, I have a 6-month-old who is going to bed at 8 o'clock and taking 2 feeds in the night and waking up at 3 a.m. and having a screaming fit. So that will be sort of information along with my preferences. There is then a tailored plan that will be given to parents through the app. And then on top of that, we have a chat function, which you get kind of coached in the moment, which used to be human-led. It's now AI-driven. So yes, it is app-based, and it's a highly curated, personalized plan on how to take you from where you are to have your child sleeping through the night, going to bed sort of simply and easily.
Okay, I love that. And just to underscore for the founders on this call as well, we all talk about solving a pain point, and not getting a good night's sleep and your baby not getting to sleep are definitely big, intense pain points. So love that you're solving that with Batelle. I have to double click into a couple of points that you mentioned there before I get on to the other questions. One, you mentioned cameras. I'm just really curious. How did you allow the parents to let you put cameras into the baby's bedrooms?
Completely. So I think what's so interesting, and I know we'll talk about fundraising at some point on the call as well, but that's always a question investors ask, is how the heck does the camera component work? What is really fascinating is we've been around for about 4 years. In all of our time that we've sent cameras, and literally to over 5,000 families, I can count on 2 hands how many people had any kind of pushback on this, which is a fascinating, very surprising insight actually for us. And the reason we did cameras was because we realized that the bedroom and a parent, and especially the bedroom, but a parent-child's dynamic within a household is something that no one really understands. And it's very unusual to be able to get an insight on how those children and parents interact, alongside then being able to say, how does our input, our coaching input over that, how does that actually affect the childhood outcomes? And so the camera was really a way for us to understand the issue backwards. And I think to date, we have by far the largest data set on this, but also the deepest understanding of sleep and sleep training, because we have observed thousands of families. We have thousands of data points on this. I think what maybe to sort of step back and contextualize a little bit is sleep is an entry point into a far bigger problem, which is sort of parent coaching at large. And there are multiple different issues that people have in the sort of parenting realm. And I think the mistake a lot of people make is they say, parenting is what I do in the daytime. The moment that it's nighttime, it suddenly turns to sleep training. Actually, if you think about it, sleep training is just parenting at night. And we still, with this sort of sleep training or sleep umbrella, within that, there is still, you're dealing with communication issues. You're dealing with potty training issues. You're dealing with how to, negotiate with your toddler, or how to set boundaries. It's the same issues. It's just under a far narrower, more specific goal function, because everyone wants their child to go to sleep and stay asleep. And so having the cameras there really allowed us to understand how the sort of parent and child interaction, which can be applied to the nighttime, which it currently is, but then also to the daytime.
Sure. Okay, makes sense. So I think you're completely correct. Very fascinating that there was very, very little pushback with getting the cameras in. So just to clarify, was the cameras in the baby's bedrooms, was that part of the research piece? Like that was the early stage, just to gather the insight?
It was research, but we actually charged for it. So we charged $1,500 to families, which was, it's a hefty price point. And people would pay us to then put cameras in their child's room. And we then had a team of 24/7 sleep experts distributed globally. And the reason that people wanted to put the cameras in is because they could get instant feedback on how they were interacting. So we used it as a way to coach them, and then to figure out which of our interventions worked best for which type of family, which type of child. And there was a really, really robust feedback loop that we had from early on. I think the fact that we were able to charge for it in retrospect is quite mind-blowing.
Well, this is what I was just about to say.
Yeah,
like not only have they let you put cameras in, but then pay you to have, which again is just a testament to the pain point that you're solving. Again, just to underscore that for founders here, the bigger the pain point, the easier it is to charge people and build a sustainable business off the back of it.
Completely. And I wish I could say, and just for everyone, like I wish I could say that that was a very intentional decision, that we were clever enough to preempt and say, because the pain point is so acute, this will be something that people will allow us into their homes with. It actually wasn't quite that well thought out. We just got really lucky on that. And it ended up that I think logistically as well, even if someone has a really acute pain point, let's say a toddler tantrum in the daytime, it's very difficult logistically to carry a camera around, or what do you do? Pick up your phone. It's just, there's more challenges, more hurdles, but nighttime is very constrained. And I think, yeah, it was, I do think though, starting out, having a understanding of sort of how you can get a data advantage is really useful. And I think that's what, yeah, less intentional than I would like to claim it is. But it
things
has proved very useful.
they always seem so much better in hindsight, don't they? It was all part of the master plan, whereas actually the reality is in the moment, you're just doing the best you can. So before we move on really quickly, obviously the whole talk isn't just going to be about cameras in cameras in cots, but I think just to be really, really practical and thinking about the Oneday founders who are listening in as well here, remind me again, just really quickly, Gigi, how many people did you say you got these cameras into? How many families?
Yeah, over 5,000 families.
Over 5,000 families. Was this like early stage when you were just starting out with Batelle?
This is over about, so the cameras was over about a 3-year period. We've stopped cameras for the last year because we realized that our learnings actually were plateauing, and we wanted to move to a more automated model, which we have done. And we then couldn't have, we actually, there's an option to potentially bring cameras back in, but with using AI to actually live guide. But no, it was sort of I'd say the first 3 years.
So the practical question I want to ask you for the founders' benefit, which I'm sure is on many of their minds, is how you found 5,000 families.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So more along the lines of like the acquisition strategy and how did we find, yeah. So our thesis was that, all right, again, sort of zooming out, I'll talk high level about what our assumptions about the market were, and then sort of how we did it practically. So assumptions about the market were, if we could understand the edge cases, so the most acute pain point, we would get the best map of the territory, and we'd be able to, if we could solve for the most severe sleep issues, we could then solve for the in between. And Google, and I think maybe a distinction that people, I don't know if people have heard yet, but the distinction between an intent-based sort of strategy and a discovery-based strategy. So intent-based is very much, it's Google, or it's any channel that someone will, with very high intention, is going to look for something. So on Google, you will search for sleep trainer near me. That's intent. Discovery is more about, you're on Instagram and you get an advert that says, hey, do you need help with your child's sleep? You're not actively looking for it. You're getting educated in that realm. And I think it very much depends on the problem. So just for everyone here, like the strategy you pick, I would very much look at, is this something that people are actively searching for? Usually the lowest hanging fruit is the intent-based market. And that's actually what we focused on initially. So Google was our best performer by far. We did most of our acquisition actually through Google. And what we found was, because people were high intent, they were searching for specifically help, we were getting people who were sort of 10 out of 10 on the desperation scale. And what's really interesting is this is not something I think that's necessarily applicable to all businesses, but think about frameworks that are going to be useful for you to understand who your customer is. And for us, when we were charging $1,500 price point, our customer segment actually was, the demographic was middle income America. It was very much sort of $1,500. It seems very high for the income that people were actually earning. And the reason is that it was often a trade-off of, I have to give up my job, or something has to give, or my mental health is going to give, or I need to solve this problem. And so for us, actually the demographic was more about the pain point at a time. So it was when they were 10 out of 10 desperate, then they would purchase the product. And so Google was really useful because that's where the 10 out of 10 people go. So I think for anyone that's solving a problem that is a very, very acute pain point, I would very much look at Google as a good acquisition strategy, but I would add a caution, because I think Google, it's inherently capped. There are only so many people, and maybe you can build a multi-billion-dollar business on the number of people searching for stuff on a specific topic, but it's inherently capped. And until you don't neglect the awareness, top of the funnel stuff where you're actually educating people about your brand, not just going straight for the people who are, you know, looking to convert.
Okay, super interesting. So you mentioned frameworks.
Yeah.
Do you remember any? Do you have any off the top of your head that help you identify who your target audience is? While you think about it, I'm gonna put a light on because I feel like it's getting dark here. So
What time is it for you?
it's 7:30, but it's a very gloomy day, and I feel like I'm in a dark room. So keep
Go for it,
talking.
go for it, go for it. Okay, perfect. Frameworks is actually, there are none that I've used. I can't remember where they're from, but I've used a number over time where you kind of identify a customer demographic through different lenses. So I think one thing we did, one really practical hack, I think, for people is once you start to get customers, in order to understand who they are, there's actually a lot of research you can do in terms of taking their LinkedIn profiles. And this, again, a super hack is use Upwork. I don't know if people have ever come across Upwork, but basically you can outsource so much stuff. And so, for example, what we would do is start building out our customer demographic maps where you say, where does this person live? What is their job title? You kind of create a little bit of a profile of who that person is, and then you can actually back engineer, for example, something like what their salary might be. Or you might find, like, a really interesting insight for us was our customers don't live in the city, they actually live in the suburbs almost exclusively, which again, such a counterintuitive because we were a high price point at the time. But to really, yeah, to understand that the customer by sort of back engineering who they are and where they live and what they do. I think in terms of frameworks starting out, I've used many, and I think a lot of them you can find, and one day we'll have as well. But we've just often will go through like describing who the customer is, really creating personas around that. I also think weirdly Pinterest is a very useful thing to do where you create a Pinterest board of what your customer tangibly looks like, what they do day to day. And it gives you such a good idea of really who this person is and who the person is you're talking to.
Yeah. So great question from Joe. And by the way, guys and gals, we'll be doing an audience Q&A towards the end. But obviously, if any kind of burning questions come up, please keep them coming in the chat anyway. But Joe, we're on the similar sort of wavelength, is how you actually used. So I presume that you hired a freelancer to sift through. You mentioned LinkedIn. You had your bullet point list of like customer profile. And so was it a case of you just saying, can you go and simply like
Exactly.
collate a load of LinkedIn profile and
Do
then
all the legwork.
to contact?
Exactly. Exactly. And
Okay.
I think one of the things I would advise people to do is figure out what your hourly rate is, in the sense of at what amount is it actually better for you to outsource something and use your time elsewhere. And I think the
Yeah.
more you can start to free up these more mundane tasks going to take you 2 days in an Excel spreadsheet, trying to get to grips with it and going through, Upwork is such a phenomenal resource. And I would default to use it more than you think you need to use it. And you can do it for any kind of thing. If you want to do market research, like there's so many different things that you can actually outsource to people. There are tons of freelancers that you can find, and literally you can type in, if you want to do market research analyst, you'll find someone who does that. And there's
And I
a
think
lot of things you can, yeah.
Sorry, no, absolutely. I think that's super important. That's really valuable to share with the group. I would say that there's quite a mindset shift with that as well, at least like from personal experience, kind of going from being the doer and feeling like you've got to take it all on and you've got to be busy and you've got, this to-do list that's as long as your arm, but shifting your mindset to I can outsource this, I can delegate that, I think is a great, little pearl of wisdom that you shared with the group there. Do you have your benchmark of kind of hourly rate worth where it's like anything under than this, I'm outsourcing it?
I do. And I think it's really useful for everyone to sort of sit down, and it'll be different. And I think there's a really good book actually called Buy Back Your Time, and it helps you kind of understand. It gives you some very concrete strategies on how to maximize time, but then also how to sort of internally create an hourly rate that you think is, something that you should outsource versus keep. I think the other reason to outsource though is it's so useful to see what other people come up with, and it gives you I think it's often easier to be an editor of work than an author and an editor. And even when it
Yeah.
comes to things like market research, when you get something delivered, and this is like, or when you look at, okay, this is the customer profile that we're looking at, there are going to be insights that you won't have got to on your own. And then you can spend some time really going through it and thinking through it. And I think it's really useful for a bit of distance on some of these sort of tasks that are actually very useful to outsource.
I love that. I'm just typing in like the book recos and these little pearls of wisdom.
Yep.
And I'm just want to put in there, you can't be both the author and the editor. I love that. I totally get it. Like you do see things from a different perspective when someone else has done that kind of heavy lifting for you. So a great little quote. I'm just popping in the chat there. That's awesome. So on the customer profile piece, I would love Gigi kind of sticking with the early days of Batelle. So
Yep.
you mentioned that you kind of put together a customer profile, like demographic, where do they live, what do they do, use Pinterest. I love that as a little tip as well to really get into like more the realities of their day-to-day life. How did you go about actually validating that? How did you
Yeah.
know that they would be the right audience? Because rarely do we get it right first time around.
Yeah. So I think to put in context, we were direct to consumer. So B2B sales cycles are going to be very different, for example. But our strategy was we were going to sell from day one. And so validation was, are people parting with their money or not? And so I literally think it was in not week 2, month 2 that we started selling. And we did it very manually to start. We would reach out to people, reach out to our networks. We had a sleep expert who was working with us, her network as well. We really very, very, very manual. And the way we started to validate, so, or let me talk you through the evolution, because we literally started off. Okay, actually, it started off with a 50-page document where the sleep expert and myself sat down and I got all of the wisdom out of her head and onto a piece of paper. And it was like 50 pages of just writing. Then summarized it into about 5 different sort of steps. This is again super unpersonalized. It was 5 PDF documents. That was V1 of the product. And we used WhatsApp as a form to communicate. So we'd built nothing apart from a bit of my time, a bit of her time, and we used WhatsApp. We then got people to pay $1,500. In fact, it started off with $1,750. So it started off even higher. We got them to pay that amount. And I think that was the proof point was, wow, okay, people are actually willing to part with their money at a high price point. But the big thing for us was we had a money back guarantee on results. And so it was a very punchy value prop and a money back guarantee that if it didn't work, they would get a full refund, which we honored all the way through. And so for us, validation. Oh, sorry, Stephanie, you got a question?
That's okay. I have, but it's okay. Finish what you were saying.
No, so validation for us was very much, can we convince people, even if they are in our network, I think it's still a useful proximate. Can we get them to part with their money? And then number 2, how does this work? How do they respond to the product? How many people ask for their money back? I mean, that was for us a big indicator of satisfaction. I think we didn't do NPS early enough or CSAT, depending on what people do. So NPS is your net promoter score. How much do people love the product? CSAT, gosh, I don't know what it stands for, but very similar. And I think that's a really good way to validate as well, which we didn't actually do originally, but I would do again if I went back. I think we were lucky in the sense that we knew there was a pain point. And I think that's maybe the step that you're asking that I'm skipping over, because we didn't actually have to validate that people struggled. I think the thing that we had to validate was, were people willing to pay for this? Were they willing to pay a premium for this because we were charging a premium? Does it work? So will they refund or not? And then I think it was really being very close to the customer. I mean, I remember when I was literally helping people, guiding them, I was very in the thick of things, we all were, and just seeing how people responded. And I think the point at which we were like, okay, there's something really here, was just the reaction of people. We had both mothers and fathers would get onto a call with us at the beginning. So we did manual sales calls. Actually, it's a really good way to do it as well, is give your time in the beginning, speak to your customer as much as humanly possible. And so the way we did that was we gave free consultations. So anyone could book online. It was a Calendly on a website. It went straight to my calendar. I took all the sales calls for a good 3 months. And I would speak to people and understand exactly what they were looking for, what did I say that worked or didn't work with them. So we had a very good snapshot of what they were and what they needed coming in. And then at the end, we would also we were very close to them the whole time. And then we would speak to them again at the end, all the way through, but again at the end. And I think the sort of aha moment for me was we had parents who'd get onto the call with me at the beginning on the sales call in tears. They were exhausted. They were at their wits' end. And then about sort of a week or two later, they'd get on a call with me again. And again, they were in tears, but they were in tears because they had their first night's sleep in over a year.
Oh my
So
God.
I think like it was a very visceral validation for us in the sense of, and that didn't mean it was easy. We've had a very up and down, like there's so many ups and downs of any company, but I think for us, the pain point was actually at the easier part because it was something that was acutely felt, but no one had actually been able to solve.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. So I often come across entrepreneurs who have built a business around a pain point that they've experienced personally. And it happens like a lot. And like to the founders here on the group as well, like it happens very frequent. I'm sure pretty much everyone, the vast majority of the Oneday community have come in because they've experienced something. But of course, there is a distinction between a pain point felt by yourself individually on a personal level versus there being enough of a market demand. And to your point, Gigi, not only there being enough of it, but that pain point being felt so acutely that not only will they pay for it, but they'll pay a premium. So congratulations. In your instance, it was a case of your personal, correct me if I'm wrong, your personal pain point translated to a wider market,
It wasn't no. So interestingly, I don't have kids and neither does my co-founder. So it wasn't a personal pain point, actually.
Okay, so what was the birthplace of this then?
It was really the seeing of, and it's so interesting because I can definitely I can create an argument that it's actually useful to be distanced from the problem, because if you're very close to the problem, you kind of end up being a bit more dogmatic about the way you want things done. That's one way to put it. I think it's sort of neither here nor there. I think both work. And I think feeling a pain point is actually probably a very useful thing. The reason is we saw it with people who were contemporaries and realized that this was a pain that just no one was tackling. And I think we were also lucky in the sense of people know that one of the toughest things that happen when you become a parent is you just lose your sleep. That was sort of widely understood, and it really wasn't. It was an opportunity of not being. The market was there; they just weren't being served in a very useful way.
Sure. So not first-hand pain point problem experience, but second-hand vicariously through friends, family, people that you see. We all know newborn parents or parents of newborns, they struggle with sleep. So you hired a specialist, a sleep specialist, you did that research piece, and then that customer profile, just to continue that thread from before, it sounds as though you got that right. You got that pretty close, if not correct. It sounds like there wasn't really kind of an audience pivot. It was very much inherently part of the product, the pain point you were solving, but you kind of did your research to set you up for success with that audience targeting. Yes,
I think in retrospect, I actually don't think we did enough customer segmentation at the beginning.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
Because we sort of which is not a bad thing either. We were kind of pulled, but we only kind of gave ourselves the mental model of understanding that it was a customer who had an acute pain point at a point in time. That customer could live in rural Texas. They could live in Australia. Like there weren't very many. They could have very varying different income levels. They could have very different philosophies on parenting. There was some sort of thematic parenting philosophies that were sort of more aligned with what we did. But it was more about the pain point itself. And actually, I think one of the biggest mistakes we made was we focus so much on that. I spoke earlier about the intent-based versus the discovery. So we didn't educate the market that this was a solvable problem and that we were there to solve it. We kind of waited for people who were so desperate that they were searching for this, that they found us. And while I think that did us very well in the beginning, we were very lucky to have such an acute pain that we could sort of use, and Google is very useful. I think we neglected, to our detriment, top of funnel awareness. And I think to have a real idea of, if you're marketing to someone on Instagram, you have to know exactly who that person is, what they want. And I think actually there, the more niche and the more specific, the better. So
Yeah.
I think for us, I would, if I could go back in time, I would do it slightly differently, and I would use high intent people to learn and to sort of iterate as we did. But then I would also really focus top of funnel marketing and figuring out more about who is a brand, and I think that's the other thing. You have to know who you are as a brand, and you have to know who your customer is. And if those two are, if you've got confidence in both of those and they work together, I think there is so much you can do. And I think we missed out on that opportunity a little bit and made it unnecessary for ourselves.
That's really interesting, you know, to learn from both the successes and what you would do differently, and what you just described there is essentially product market fit, right? So, but sounds like you didn't do too badly, despite, you know, wanting to go back and maybe redo some things. So, on a very kind of similar note there, you talked about Google, I presume kind of more PPC, you know, Google search for that lower of the funnel, like intent-based audience. You mentioned kind of direct outreach, obviously, again, kind of another lower of the funnel marketing channel. My next question was going to be, what were the top 1 to 3 growth levers? And it sounds as though, you know, you said that kind of middle to top of the funnel was maybe missed out. Was there something else that you did beyond Google and direct outreach that worked for you?
Yeah, so referrals was a big one for us.
Interesting.
And I think one of my learnings with referrals was, I don't know if this was a South African reserve or what it was, but I felt very awkward initially asking people, saying, hey, you know, because you loved us, do you mind referring us on? And actually, that was one of the most, like, don't underestimate the human touch. And you have to put yourself, or at least I needed to, and I did, but I had to sort of, as a challenge initially, is to put yourself out of your comfort zone and actually ask people to refer you. Because if you think about it, your product, even if they absolutely loved it, they're not going to go out of their way unless you actually ask them. And so I think if you're thinking about from a referral perspective, is what is it that you've, like, how can you incentivize someone to actually share your product beyond what they might do just sort of to a friend in a sort of normal circumstance? And so referrals was a huge one for us. And I think tracking referrals is also, it's quite difficult to track referrals. So heads up to everyone. It's difficult because, you know, someone might say, oh, you must try this product, but then they Google it and it gets attributed to Google versus to referrals. So it's inherently a difficult thing to track. But one way to mitigate that is actually, when people sign up to whatever product you have, ask them and I would do this from the beginning as well. When they sign up, once they've paid, once they've given you money, where did you hear about us from? And that then sort of is a sense check for you to say, okay, well, we're getting, you know, this is what our Google Analytics is saying. This is what our referral links are saying, but here is the delta, and here's actually a better gauge of what we think is coming from organic, always being a direct referral, always coming from Google. So I think that's a useful
great tip. Yeah, I love that.
Thing to track.
Fantastic. All right. Well, let's move along in the Batelle timeline and keep the questions coming in the chat. We'll see how many we get round to. So let's fast forward. So you've got that great traction, you've got that validation. You went through those steps through vicariously, you kind of observed that this was a pain point. You also observed the gap in the market. You proved people not only would pay for this, but they paid the premium and kind of grew, and you had your growth channels and kind of grew from there. When did you decide that it was the right time to start fundraising?
Gosh, I actually can't remember exactly the timeline, but it was at the point we did. So our first fundraise was a seed round. I actually wasn't very involved in the first fundraise, and I think what's really interesting is I was very involved in our sort of later fundraisers, and it's a very interesting dynamic. If anyone has co-founders of, I think this, I have never seen anyone speak about this as a challenge, but there's a really interesting dynamic is when you have more than one person fundraising, it creates, why it's interesting is I think so much of investors' decisions are based on people. And some people are going to resonate with a certain set of people, and other people are going to resonate with a different set of people. And so if you have two people, then that investor suddenly has to resonate with both people. And anyway, so just an interesting dynamic. But we did a seed round. I can't actually remember, but it was really at the point where we had proof of concept. We basically needed to then start scaling our engineering team as sort of like a priority one, because we'd done this super manually. As I said, we'd concierged every step. We didn't build anything. WhatsApp, Google Sheets, Google Docs. Yeah, that was it. Literally, maybe Typeform at the beginning. And then it was, okay, we need to actually start doing a dashboard, or we need a place to start actually gathering this data, being able to make it into a usable format. And then we started hiring out our engineering team and actually built a lot of our own internal tools, which was very useful from the data collection perspective, because it meant that all the messages, we've now got over sort of 4.2 million chat messages. And this is full credit to my co-founder. He preempted that chat would be a thing 4 years ago, like chat first. And so we've been chat first from the beginning, and very much that's been our modality, which is we sort of have then a database for all of these messages, which has allowed us to then, do a lot with that data and sort of fine tune models eventually and things like that. But yeah, it was really, the impetus was to hire the engineering team is why we fundraised.
Yeah, okay, makes perfect sense. So post fundraise, you've got the money in the bank, you're hiring the engineering team. What were some of the biggest surprises to you going from that early scrappy startup phase through to more of a sophisticated scale up?
I think the biggest surprise, I've always loved the idea of being a manager, or like managing's always been something that has felt very glamorous. And when there were three of us originally, then there were about six of us, and everyone still at that stage was super scrappy, doing everything, wearing so many different hats. Then we started to scale the team, and suddenly I was forced into sort of not forced, but by necessity, went into sort of more managerial roles, which I hadn't done before. And I actually found it much more challenging than I thought I would. And I realized I actually don't enjoy managing that much. I love the leadership piece, but leadership and management are two entirely different beasts. And actually managing people, and to be a good people manager, takes so much time and effort and investment into people and processes. I think for me, that was a personal surprise of just how challenging I thought it would be a lot easier for me than it was. And I thought I would enjoy it more than I did. I think other challenges was just, I think the growth and the size of the team makes such a massive difference to how the team communicates, and how it really, that the smaller the team, the faster you can move. So I would advise everyone to try and keep a team as lean as humanly possible for as long as you can. And when you do need to start scaling up in terms of people, you're going to have to start doing that. But there is a significant difference between a team of, say, 10 to 12 people to then 30 people to then 50 people. Like just that the system becomes so much more cumbersome.
Yeah, makes complete sense. And I think that actually very nicely links into one of the questions that was asked in the chat, which was around contracting, outsourcing versus hiring. Obviously, you mentioned like Upwork before for some of those tasks in the early days. I think the particular question here was slightly different, which was more on the fundraising, about outsourcing that. I mean, yeah, I don't know about you, Gigi, but I would definitely say do not outsource that. The fundraising needs to be, that is definitely founder job number one.
Absolutely.
To answer that question for you, Geneva. But that's really interesting on the team thing. Did you notice, coming back to kind of that sort of scale up, that growth, and it becoming a very different sort of beast, was there a particular like number or point that you remember where you were like, oh, this feels, maybe it was like 49 to 50, where you're like, this just feels really different?
I think the inflection point for me was around the 25 people mark, where
Interesting.
before, because I think it demanded different things from me. And I started then really having to step into, it wasn't just all of us on sort of maybe even less, maybe 20 to 25. I found that was the biggest step change. And then I'd say again at sort of, 45 to 50 again, sort of it's just like it's a completely different beast when you've got more. Suddenly it's not, then people need more clarity from you than you're used to, or I was used to giving, because I was just used to saying, okay, that needs to be done, I'm going to do it, or someone else will do it. Very scrappy. And I think that's my happy. Love stage, scrappy, just a little bit of chaos. And that me operating in that mode wasn't useful for a team, when actually what you need at that point is structures. And I think the biggest learning is when you're kind of moving into a scale up mode, was making sure you have the right processes in place, otherwise things do break. But when things break, not if, when things break, I also think it's a really wonderful time to look at why they're breaking, and don't over engineer building before they actually break. Like, one of my biggest lessons is that I had was learning how to let things burn. And what that means is, there are some fires that you are going to have an inbox filling up with customers who are irritated, or you're going to have something that is going wrong somewhere. And one of the best things that you can do is deciding which fire to let burn, and be comfortable with that, and say, okay, I realize that this is a massive problem that is going to explode at some point, but right now I'm not dealing with it. I'm going to deal with something else. Because if you try and spread yourself too thin and deal with all the fires, you actually just end up trading water. And so getting comfortable with something being blatantly incorrect or wrong or broken, I would say, is a huge superpower.
It's painful. It's
very
totally painful. But it's kind of like that mother hen anecdote, where it's that story where, I can't remember the specifics, but where her chicks are like running around and she's trying to save them all, and they all end up, dying, instead of just kind of focusing on one or two. I can't remember. It's not very pretty, but
I haven't heard it, but yes,
it
sounds
something along those lines. Google like the mother hen anecdote is like the perfect, like, don't try and fix everything, because it's just impossible. Like, you've just got to really learn how to prioritize. Really, really interesting, Gigi. I think, everything completely resonates. I think, I definitely experienced, just even when like teams went from single digit to double digit, it's like, oh, this feels very different. All right, super interesting. Let's go to some of the questions on the chat. If anyone's got any questions for Gigi, please type them in just while we're going through some of the others. So from Eric, at what point did the product price drop happen, and how did it relate to the funding strategy of the project? So I guess that's from like the 1750 to the 1500 point.
So actually, there's even a more dramatic one, which is, and maybe this is a useful evolution to talk through, is we'd preempted chat first, which was very useful. And we had done a very human in the loop, very manual concierge and approach, which also meant we had an incredibly high cost base, because we had a team of, at one point, probably, I'd say 35 sleep experts all over the world, like a massive team of human capital. And what we realized was, we got to a point where we were able to really automate that down, but people are only willing to pay $1,500 if you literally have a human being watching over you. And so I think from a fundraising perspective, it was really interesting, because one of the biggest objections we always had was that we were a servicing business. And even though we were in this sort of data collection stage to a degree, where we were still building out this infrastructure that could then be used to scale, just inherently, because of the type of business we were in that sort of servicing stage, I would say, for longer than certainly most software companies. That was the biggest pushback we had, or one of the biggest pushbacks we had from a fundraising perspective. And the price drop. So now we've got two prices. One is $349 and one is $149. And that the $149 is entirely automated. It's just AI. The $349 has a human in the loop. But what's really interesting is 80% of the time, people will still choose our AI over a human. And I think that we worked hard on that, on figuring out how to change behavior. But because we have such a good understanding of the problem, and we've got such a rich data set, our AI is really, really good, and it's immediate, and it's a fast feedback, and it's highly personalized. So from a fundraising perspective, it's made it a lot easier in a lot of ways, because it objection handles one of the biggest sort of critiques originally. But I think it was also out of and I saw another question which might not answer. Was Sophia's, which is, can you talk more about what the personal pain point is not felt acutely in a big enough market? And I think this is exactly why we also lowered prices, was we got to a point where Google actually tapped out for us, where they were not, we sort of saturated the people who were typing, looking for a sleep issue on Google, who were willing to pay $1,500. And so the way we kind of dealt with that was to expand. So channel expansion was important, but then also price point, playing and testing different price points. And even now, we're still sort of testing a lot of different price points to see what resonates. But that means that it's a lot more accessible. And then I spoke about the customer profile being sort of, our demographic really was due to like pain points, so 10 out of 10 on sort of like just unbelievably need this solution. And we were able to then get people who were maybe not as much in need of it, but they needed it. And so we sort of widened our customer demographic by lowering the price point as well. So I think
Yeah.
price is a really interesting lever. I would say, though, it's always easier to decrease your price, and it's usually much more difficult to increase your price, especially if you have a recurring relationship with customers. So if you're going to validate something or to validate a price point to a market, I would actually start at the higher end and then work your way down in terms of pricing, because that's a lot easier, a lot more palatable than it is the opposite way around.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, Gigi. That is such an important point. And I think to everyone here as well, just to underscore, is do not use lower pricing alone as a competitive advantage,
Absolutely.
because I mean, I talk to my founders about this in my squad as well. You are just on a slippery slope. It's a downward spiral where like you're just undercutting. And the thing is, you'll only attract an audience that's bargain hunting. So as soon as someone else puts on a sale, they're just going to go and run to the other guys. So I
Exactly.
love that you said that. Just to also mention, there's a fantastic talk by a guy called Rory Sutherland on like pricing strategies. So I love that. Was there any more you wanted to say to that, Gigi, or should we move on to more questions?
No, I think I'm good on that.
Nice. Okay, fantastic. All right, loads more questions coming in now. How did you connect with a specialist and have them join their team from Teresa? I think that was on the sleep specialist at the beginning.
Yeah. So we actually had someone who was working sort of as I'd say an analyst, and he reached out to a ton of different people and then set up interviews and sort of really understood really like who was the best person who could support on this. And so it was just outreach and sort of, I would say, somewhat of an interview process. And that's how we kind of found them originally. And then from there was sort of, we've hired a number of sleep experts over our time. And that was actually just, I would say, a very normal hiring process. So we used, gosh, what job boards did we use? But just your normal sort of job boards for most of them.
Amazing. All right. Well, gang, I'm sorry to say the time has flown. We're already at the 2-minute mark. But what we're doing is we always run out of time. Everyone keeps sending in the questions, but we put them over onto the community Slack channel. So let's continue the conversation over there. Joseph L. Draper, thank you so much. You remembered. You didn't let me forget. Just before I answer that, we'll put the questions on the community Slack channel. So we'll answer either myself or Gigi if we can get around to it. We'll answer any other questions we haven't been able to get to today. Just before we leave you, we do have a feedback form for you. So just bear with me 2 secs while I get this sorted. So as always here at Oneday, we love to get your feedback. We are constantly iterating and making sure that we are doing better. The main thing that I want to ask all of you from today's super insightful chat with Gigi, I know there's so much more that we could talk about, but the number one question to ask you all is, what is your biggest takeaway from today's fantastic conversation? So please fill out that form, or you can scan the QR code here on screen, answer that question. And as I said, we'll be answering all the other questions we didn't get time for over on the community Slack channel. And then who was it? It was me about Haagen-Dazs. Joseph. Okay. Haagen-Dazs is
I'm
just the
intrigued
total.
now.
I know, I've had like an hour to get everyone all intrigued about it. Haagen-Dazs, kind of like Batelle, is just a totally made up brand name that is not Swiss or German or Austrian. It's I think 2 American co-founders, I believe, might need to fact check that, but they basically just came up with this foreign sounding name that kind of alluded to this idea of kind of like Belgian chocolate, foreign, like tasting it, but it is completely made up. It's not, there's no Mr. Hagen or Mr. Does. It's just a completely made up name to just sound foreign and like delicious ice cream. So that's your reward for staying tuned and for bearing with us for the entire hour. Gigi, thank you so much. The time has absolutely flown. I feel like I could do at least 2-3 more hours with you. So thank you so much for your time. Really, really interesting.
Thank you, Stephanie, and yeah, thank you for everyone for joining. And feel free to reach out or connect, and happy to answer any additional questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much.